Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another SECPA session. During this time of social and physical distancing, SECPA believes it's important to keep engaging with the public on issues of the day, and in order to do so, we are very thankful for the continuing support we receive from the University of Lethbridge, Shaw Spotlight, and the Lethbridge Herald. Today we have with us from Ottawa, Marwa Awad, and she'll be talking on why should people give money to the UN's World Food Programme or other aid agencies when there's so much need in developed world countries. Marwa Awad works as a humanitarian aid communications officer with the World Food Programme in areas of conflict including Iraq, Syria, Burkina Faso, and South Sudan. In the past decade, she has seen how investing in WFP food assistance operations means investing in keeping people alive and healthy, as well as limiting their inclinations to flee elsewhere, which disrupts both local and international economies. Supporting WFP also means helping build the resilience of communities so that they can get back on their own feet. Marwa is coming to us from her home in Ottawa after serving in hotspots in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you, Annalise, and thanks everyone. I'm happy to be here with you. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you about the work that I've been part of, working with the World Food Programme in areas of conflict. Specifically, I focused on the Middle East, but I've also had the opportunity to be visiting countries in West Africa, in the Sahel region, Burkina Faso mainly, and also South Sudan in Central East Africa. So what I want to do is talk to you about, the hot topic, and then have a discussion with you about COVID-19 and how it's changed pretty much everything. So not just our daily lives, but also the way humanitarian agencies are able to carry out their work. So we should be going to the next slide, Annalise. So when COVID-19 hit Europe, I was in Rome, Italy, and I couldn't help but notice how the isolation that I was part of and my colleagues were experiencing, the restrictions on movement, also news of people and neighbors losing their livelihoods or their lives coming down to a halt, and people being separated from their families and loved ones. I couldn't help notice that similarity between all these experiences that we were living in a developed country such as Italy, and what the internally displaced, the war-torn people that I've worked with in the past years have been living through for decades. So our lockdown was just, to me, I realized it's just a glimpse of an ongoing lockdown that millions of people are unfortunately going through. And this connection then made me realize that it's really important to be able to talk to communities, talk to friends around me, and to pass the message that now is the time that we really have to have global solidarity. But let's then go through the story and what this crisis is. So internally displaced people are people who are uprooted or forced away from their home within their country because of man-made conflict. And in the past 6 to 7 years, I've been working day to day with, or meeting with, families that have lost everything. And the potential that's lost is tremendous. And it's actually too much of a burden to witness on a daily basis, especially in countries like Syria and Iraq, where there was a system in place. There was a country, people had jobs, people had a certain living standard, and they've lost everything, and now they have been reduced to, a life of quiet desperation. Images such as children kicking dirt in camps, idle with nothing to do, not going to school, not being able to go to school because their schools have been bombed. These are all realities that will not change to the better on their own or very quickly, because destruction usually takes a long time to be turned around. So I want us to recognize that we know that things will improve here. Of course, there are difficulties. People have lost their livelihoods and people's movements have been restricted and we're unable to see our families. But we also have this hope, and we know that our countries and our governments are there for us. And a country like Canada and other countries in the West have rolled out stimulus packages to support people who are undergoing, the socioeconomic fallout from the spread of this pandemic. None of these certainties are available, on the other hand, to the people who've been living in conflict. Millions of people, like in Syria, in Yemen, in South Sudan, in Burkina Faso, and across the world. I'm just naming the countries that I physically visited and remember very well. So, next slide, before I forget. So that point about recognizing that we're lucky is really crucial, because then we're able to put things in perspective and we're able to see that, yes, there is a tunnel. Now, perhaps we can also extend that hope to those who don't have it. Before I get into what we're worried about, I want to quickly tell you what things were like. What was the narrative that humanitarians were sharing with the world to raise awareness before COVID-19 hit? So, in the past 4 years, there has been this triangle of despair. It's a triangle of despair including man-made conflict, poverty, and climate change. And these three culprits have been sweeping across many countries across the globe and affecting the lives of many, disrupting the lives of many, killing people by the thousands, if not the hundreds of thousands. And at that time, our figures, the figures of need that we were seeing or we were tracking, were the following. 60% of the hungry people, let me go back a bit. So we tracked about nearly 1 billion people on the planet, on Earth, were food insecure. So they were unable to provide food for themselves. So they were either one of two categories: acutely hungry, or people who have, sorry, just losing track here. Yeah, so people who are either acutely hungry or people who are extremely food insecure. And these two differ in the sense that some families, or many families, would wake up one day and find themselves on the brink of starvation. They've lost everything, while other families go through this chronic hunger of going to bed every day without a meal, or skipping meals in order to provide for their young ones. And we tracked 60% of those hungry people live in war-torn countries. Syria and Yemen are classic examples of how this kind of hunger and conflict were really enmeshed together, and causing this, this colossal damage and colossal need. With the advent of COVID-19, things get worse, because not necessarily because the pandemic is spreading and people are catching, in developing countries, people are catching this pandemic. Of course they are, but in some countries, like in Yemen, we cannot really track because there is no infrastructure, and the health system has been weakened to its knees. So we know there is a spread, but we're not really witnessing a mass spread of the pandemic. But what we are afraid of is that this will ultimately lead to socioeconomic dangers that might drive people more and more into desperation. So the average farmer in South Sudan, for example, no longer has the money because the supply routes and the movement within the country has been disrupted. So that farmer, that lone farmer, no longer has the money to buy seeds or fertilizers. People who are civil servants or they are street vendors, they are no longer able to go out and resume their work. And as a result of this loss of livelihoods, we expect the following numbers. I don't know if we can get to the slide with the graph. So we're expecting the numbers of people who are acutely hungry to rise to 265 million people by the end of 2020 if no aid is pumped into these countries through the organizations that are there on the ground saving lives. And so there's also a risk of a further or an added 130 million people who could very likely become food insecure. So they're not necessarily, they're not a case of losing, it's not a case of losing their livelihoods necessarily, but it's perhaps a case of having less money or the value of their currency in which they use has gone down, and there's a price hike in food and essentials. And so therefore they're unable to provide to themselves and their loved ones a sufficient meal. So unfortunately, the numbers are harrowing. We're estimating that 30 million people could die of starvation during this pandemic if the World Food Program loses funding or the ability to keep supporting people. The World Food Program is the largest organization in the world that combats hunger. Combating hunger is our main mandate, in addition, of course, to improving and treating nutrition or malnutrition amongst the populations in need. Okay. Next slide, please. So given that there are long-term consequences to the conflict, even before COVID-19, we know that COVID-19 and that specter of that pandemic will ultimately bring those developing countries further down to their knees and down the path of no return, even just a very serious spiral to more chaos and more conflict. And this is where we come in and say countries that have the ability to fund, even though, yes, these countries are also suffering, but the level of suffering is not as drastic, so that luckily we, as countries in the West, have the ability to fund these countries, such as the countries that are struggling in the global South or in third world nations. I wanted to tell you quickly what WFP is doing specifically. We're working on the front lines to maintain the delivery of food assistance. And we always like to say we're saving lives and changing lives. So what does that mean? Saving lives is really the essence of WFP, has been the essence of WFP for a long time, because we are first responders. So we're always the first ones on the ground whenever a crisis of any sort hits. Climate change, hurricanes, conflict. As soon as there is access, we're on the ground there to deliver food, because food is the most essential commodity that is needed to support people who've been recently affected. We are operational in 100 countries, and every year we reach close to 100 million people across those 100 countries. 30 million of our recipients of the 100 million people would not survive without our food. So we literally are keeping 30 million people alive from day to day. So this is how essential this life-saving aid is, in the form of food rations or vouchers, because some areas that have been hit or affected by conflict or climate change still have functioning markets. And so WFP has this complex programs that they're rolled out into a given country and allow people to have a semblance of normalcy by giving them vouchers and the like, and this kind of support. So it's not always in-kind support of a food box, but it definitely is an essential aspect of what we do. Now, an interesting tidbit is that we distribute 15 billion food rations every year, And according to our internal math, the average cost for each ration is 31 US cents. So it's actually, the cost is low, and the ability to provide is high, and the effect is extremely palpable. You can see that in Syria. I've been living there. I lived there for 3 years. The World Food Program was the largest on the ground. It is also the largest on the ground in Yemen and in South Sudan. And these countries would not survive without this constant support that we are, of course, receiving from donors and turning into the supply chain that rolls in the assistance that we're then able to deliver. One important factor to consider is whenever there is a conflict, either of those three culprits, the conflict because of hunger, conflict because of political issues or matters, or climate change, people, as much as they love being home and love staying in an area that they know very well, and a place where they've grown all their lives, their survival mechanism kicks in. So if a country has fallen into the chaos of war, and no assistance is provided, and no survival mechanisms are available, people will up and go. People will migrate. And they don't do that because of, they're not looking to self-actualize. They're not looking for an amazing job. I'm talking about much more basic survival needs. They're escaping to remain alive, whether it's to escape persecution or to escape hunger, just not being able to provide for their families. And in previous talks that I believe I saw a talk by Trevor Page, and he made a good point of countries anywhere, but the example he gave was a country a given country in Africa. The elders wouldn't necessarily travel. The mother that's desperate because she's unable to farm her little plot of land because no rain is coming and the drought is killing everyone. She will not necessarily go, but her son will make that dangerous trip across the sea and the ocean to find succor in a country that is functioning, a country that's safe. Our figures show that for every 1% of a rise and increase in hunger because of conflict or climate change or extreme poverty, we get 2% increase in migration. So the hungrier a people get, the more likely they are to up and go, unless, of course, they stop being hungry or aid moves in and people provide assistance. Next slide. One key thing that we do at WFP is that we analyze the markets. We analyze food, the levels of food security or insecurity in a country, because we need data to be able to then ascertain, should we move in? Is this a situation that can be manageable for short time or an extended time? So that's very important to have this sort of information. And to have this kind of information, we have to have boots on the ground. And that's what's amazing about WFP. It's an 18,000 strong body of humanitarians who exist or live in 100 countries. And the operations are colossal, so that they are driven by monitoring analyses, as well as physical assistance being delivered through a complex logistical arm, which we also are responsible for. So WFP is kind of, the transport service for the entire UN. So we don't just deliver our own food, but also the assistance and the aid from other sister agencies. And I wanted to highlight that to you, because very often we get the question or the concern of, how do you know food is getting to the people who need it most? Well, the answer is we are there on the ground. And if we're not, if there are areas that are hard to reach, we call them, we have partners. And these partners are trained. They come to us or we go to them. We train them so that they're able to carry out the program that we have, any given program. And one of the key things that we do is we don't just identify an area of need and send food there, but we also work hard to identify the level of need within that given area. So, for example, in Syria, we do our best to prioritize those who are more vulnerable than others. So, and we have a scheme or a scale of a vulnerability scale that allows us to prioritize, for example, female-headed households, women who've lost their husbands or their male family members and are left to their own devices, have children, and also homes that have the disabled people who've been injured by war, or also people who are elderly. So it's very important to know that when we get the funding, we then have to analyze very well how this funding is going to be distributed. I want to talk a bit about changing lives aspect, because I've talked about, the saving lives one of rolling in with the trucks and feeding people on the spot. Changing lives here has to do with development aid. It has to do with a long-term vision that humanitarian organizations, including the World Food Program, have to be able to allow a community to rebuild its resilience, its sense of resilience and ability to bounce back. And this is very important to establish in countries that, as I was saying earlier, they already had in the past a system or a structure that sustained them. They already had jobs, they had infrastructure, they had a private sector, they had safety nets. So when we move into a country, we're not just looking at the immediate handout that we give, but we also identify areas where if we just give it a push or we support it, that safety net, then the country and the people are able to eventually get back up on their feet. In Syria, school feeding is an amazing program. We're feeding now about 1 million children. Not now, because unfortunately with COVID-19, schools have been suspended, and so children are not attaining that. But before COVID, we were able to roll out this program and to keep children in school. And something very important was this gender equality that we really cared about, because in countries in the Middle East and Africa and perhaps elsewhere, it's always easier for the family to keep their female children, the girls, at home or to marry them off quickly. The World Food Program is aware of this. And then what we do is we incentivize the family to send both their boys and girls to school. And we give them a voucher, we give them food assistance so that the children continue in their enrollment. And we're seeing, or we have seen, great improvement in Syria and in other countries around the world. We also have school feeding program in South Sudan, and the improvement, and Burkina Faso. And the improvement that I'm talking about is the awareness that education is important. In South Sudan, for example, I was really amazed by speaking to many mothers who did not have an education. However, their children were going to school, and they really made that connection that, I missed out on an education, but those young ones better get it. And this is thanks to this assistance that we give, and it also has this awareness raising component. And so we're hopefully looking at a future where more and more children around the world are getting the education. Unfortunately now, in terms of the figures that we've been tracking, COVID-19 affected about 1.6 billion children and youth because of the school closures in about 190 countries. Before that, when things were, the norm of, that triangle of the conflict and the climate change and the poverty, we were reaching 17.3 million children around the world with school meals. Next slide. Now, I'm not sure if you guys are looking at a slide called Share the Meal. Are they, Annalise? Or share the meal slide. So, oh, okay. Let me see. Just a minute. So 7. Yeah, if just go back to it if it's not. Yeah. So I wanted to highlight share the meal because it's it's a it's a really innovative way to feed someone, to provide a meal, a good diet to a child, and it doesn't cost much, and it's on an app. So how easy is that? And I wanted to highlight that because our figures show that it only takes 50 cents, so 50 US cents, to feed per day to feed one child. So that's about $182.50 a year. It's really nothing, right? I mean, people can see how little of our money. I mean, thankfully, the currencies in the West count for something. They have value, but we can see how little money or resources we can give, if we choose to give it, can feed people who are desperately in need. The bigger argument is it's always cheaper to provide assistance to people in their own country of need than to sit back, watch, hum and haw, should we support, should we not support, and then not address the issue. And then the issue becomes a compounded one. Migration trends increase. People leave their homes and their countries, and then they go into, out of desperation, they go into new countries where, the cost of living is higher. So it actually makes sense. The argument is not just a moral imperative of we must help one another. It's also the fact that it's in our interest, of course, to support countries that are in need, because one way or another this problem will come to us, especially pandemic. But also it's a lot cheaper to start early and to commit the humanitarian funding that is needed to support a country or any given area. I want to talk a bit about what WFP has been doing in terms of COVID-19 response. So we are a food agency primarily, but we wear also a different hat, and that hat is the logistics hat. So we're the transport services for the entire UN, and that's really amazing. And it goes hand in hand with the identity of the World Food Programme as a first responder, because you want to get there. You don't just want to have the resources and everything in the warehouse and sort of not be able to deliver. So we have been the backbone of the global COVID-19 efforts to move things along and to get a network of hubs, cargo air links, and the medevac services. So everything from the gloves and the masks that humanitarian workers need, the PPE, the medical equipment that is needed to allow humanitarians to stay on the ground in those areas of need and to carry out their jobs, and also give them the protection to prevent any transmission of this virus. So without these services, lives will be lost. The flights right now, we know, we hear in the news that some airlines are coming back into action. But if you actually take away WFP's role as logistics, if there's no funding for us to keep carrying on with this role, there would be a huge loss to the international community in terms of being able to keep things moving and prevent any sudden collapse. So what have we done? We have set up a comprehensive system, and it's a network that enables this global response to the pandemic through airlifts. So we have airlifts from particular hubs that carry cargo and deliver to areas of extreme need. And we also keep receiving, requests for flights from other agencies, and we've had help from countries such as the UAE and Canada in being able to transport medical equipment, as well as the other necessities to prop up the health systems of the countries where we're working. So right now we're open for business, and we are actively delivering for ourselves and on behalf of people. But yesterday, experts and seniors of the World Food Program put out a warning call, saying that if we don't get the necessary funding to keep this logistical arm moving, we might have to shut down, and that's by the end of July. So it's pretty intense, because just as we were able to keep collapse of countries and health systems at bay, there's been a simultaneous increase in need and a surge in need. More and more countries, country offices, agencies are asking for our help. And this is increasing the costs. And we've only been funded by about 14% funded. And what we need is much more than that. So I'm just trying to find the figure. I believe it's around the 965 million is needed to continue with this very important and essential logistical solution and service. Now, slide 6. Can you go to slide 6? Yeah. Just want to quickly talk about Canada's contributions. Canada has donated in the past 5 years and donated to WFP for about a dozen countries the amount of 1.7 billion. And this includes Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, and countries across Africa. When we look at a donor and we try to gauge whether the donor is interested in supporting and how much can we rely on this, we don't look just at the amount of money that the donor is giving, but also the predictability of that funding. So it's great to get a huge amount, but if it's a one-off, one-time assistance, check or agreed upon amount, it doesn't really allow for this continuation of, looking forward to certain funding that we will be using to continue the rolling out or the maintenance of certain programs. So I'm saying this because Canada has been a very predictable, very committed donor to the World Food Program. And in 2019, last year, Canada ranked as one of the top 10 donors for the World Food Program. Canada ranked number 7, and the 7th largest donor, that is. And that's really important, and we're extremely grateful for this, as well as to the other countries that have been always there and giving us the assistance that we need, whether it's on this rolling basis or even when there is urgent need, such as the need that we have now with COVID-19. I'm just going to wrap up. Want to wrap up by telling you a story, just to relate to you some of the need that exists. And I'm going to use a story from Syria. In one of the countries in an area called East Ghouta, I met, after the siege was lifted, I met a man who had lost his family and through the bombardment. And he survived, and his young child survived. And I was really moved by how this man still had hope. And I was a bit, I thought, wow, you've lost everyone all of a sudden, and you have a young child. You probably can't raise it on your own, But he still had hope that, that he will be able to get to a better place, not, figuratively, not necessarily, physically. And I wrote a short story on him. And what's amazing is I got two emails from two Canadians who were asking, how can we help? And we call that individual giving. It's not the donor countries, now it's the individuals. People were moved by that story of this man, that they reached out and they said, how can we help to support? And I really want to drive this point because, as I said, the support from an individual can be so small, but yet it will go very far. If I have more time, there is a story that I also want to share with you, and I don't really mean to end on a sad note, but there is a Syrian woman that I met who was so poor. She told me she put up her daughter for adoption. So the father had died in the fighting, and she had other children, but the youngest one was so weak and frail. She didn't know what to do with her. She went to an orphanage and she left the daughter there. And she told me, look, I go to visit every day. But of course, the psychological trauma of the war is one thing. And then the trauma of, a child losing its mother, not really knowing why, even though the mom is there, but the child is not with the mom, was really moving to me because it showed me the level of desperation that people will reach when conflict is protracted and it's not ending. And thankfully, this woman does receive assistance now from the World Food Programme. So I'll end here. And if you have any questions or you want to start the discussion, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for your very engaging talk. We have quite a few questions in the queue, so I'll just start right away. Kurt Peterson, does the WFP also work with local farmers and food producers, enabling them to become better equipped to grow food and meet the nutritional needs of the region?
Absolutely. Now this modality of assistance is the Changing Lives one. It's the enabling of the farmer and the community to be able to provide its own sustenance. I saw this in South Sudan to a great extent. We have programs that provide the farmers with the fertilizers they need and the seeds, and enable them to grow their own crops, to eat from it and to sell the extra on the local market. But there's been climate change, you see. So climate change is a challenge to us. So we've moved in also with mechanisms or teaching farmers ways of farming. There is a way called the half moon, which allows the farmer to trap the rain when the rain falls. It's like to catch it, like a catchment, to trap the rain so that it sustains and nourishes the earth. Same thing in Syria. We have this amazing program called the Kitchen Gardens. And it's amazing because all you need is like a small plot of land, like about 1,500 meters or square meters of land. And we move in, provide the family with the seeds, the training, and the equipment so that they can grow their own food. And it's really amazing because many of the female-headed households became the employees of others. I met one woman with a colleague of mine in an area called Sueda, and she turned from a woman who's desperate for assistance to, a small-scale businesswoman. So she had her garden, and she had people from the local community taking the produce from her, going to sell it, and then they split the profit. So that's really great. That was a big paradigm shift for her.
Okay, our next question comes from Mark Goodall. What is the situation in Pakistan with the locust plague? Is there already a need for the WFP? If not, do you anticipate the WFP involvement there? And if so, how large?
Okay, so I'm just going to ask to put this question to a bit later because I'm not very versed in Pakistan, but I do have the latest, and I would like to just pull it up. So if we can move to the next question, and I'll return to Pakistan. Yeah.
Sorry. The next question comes from
No problem.
DeMarco. Canada has the third largest charitable sector in the world, yet the competition for funds is fierce. With the WFP not known to the wider Canadian public, what is the WFP's engagement strategy for Canada?
Good. Can you just repeat the beginning? It says Canada has the third what?
The third largest charitable sector in the world.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Okay. Yes. So, the World Food Program, I think, many months was it? Maybe 2 in March, I believe, opened a new office in Ottawa, in like my hometown of Ottawa, and we have a strong team forming now. And this is big news because it really shows the investment of the World Food Program in this part of the world in North America. We have offices in the States, of course, but now we have one in Canada. And so this allows amazing proximity to parliamentarians, to ministries that we can work closely with through sharing information and also lobbying and the sort of the sort of raising awareness. Okay, so we had a 2020 hotspots at the beginning of this year. What are the hotspots across the world? And this is the kind of information that we want to relay to stakeholders and people of interest. So we're definitely working on that, and we've started, and we're all really excited to see where we can go from there. Mm-hmm.
Our next question comes from Bev Mundo. Bangladesh has one of the highest rates of NGOs providing assistance. Does the WFP work with these local NGOs?
Yes. Yeah, WFP works with local NGOs. I don't know them by name, but we have very strong and complex programs in Bangladesh, and Canada is one of our main funders or donors in that part of the world. So definitely, and also I'm just trying to get the Pakistan one while we're here. Can you move on to the next question?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Knut Peterson, many organizations are helping feed the hungry of the world, especially religious ones. Does WFP try to coordinate all such donations, or do these organizations have their own networks?
Okay, well, I mean, definitely, we strive to work with everyone. The vetting process has nothing to do with religious versus secular. The vetting process is how much know-how do you have on the ground and how much reach. So in Syria, we do work with Christian with NGOs that have that faith mandate. So I would say definitely. I just don't know the names of the NGOs, but we never really differentiate along these lines. And the training, just to say this, the training that we give is to allow the NGO to carry out our work as if we were on the ground. That's a really key point. So we invest a lot in any given NGO, showing them the ropes and working with them and ensuring they have systems that collect and captures the data that we need to then provide with assistance. I will quickly address Pakistan since I finally found it. I don't have much to say on this, but what the latest that we have is that we are scaling up our assistance in terms of food deliveries and also the deliveries of health, deliveries of what's needed for health systems. And this is to cover an additional 1.2 million people that we fear are likely to face acute hunger and just not be able to provide for themselves. And this is because of COVID-19. But before this happened, the World Food Program has been has been working in Pakistan and providing assistance in a very complex way, covering school meals as well as just food assistance, and also the resilience building activities.
Great. And Mark Goodall has a second question. Canada is the 7th largest donor. I think you mentioned that in your talk. Is that per capita or as a country?
As a country. As a country, donating, it's our 7th largest.
Okay. Our next question comes from Laurie Schultz. Does the WFP provide or partner with other NGOs to provide female-focused reproductive health, specifically providing and or distributing female contraceptives to women in conjunction with food distribution?
Okay. So just a bit of background about WFP, like when we roll out our operations and programs. We definitely don't operate alone in any given country. We have a specific mandate. That mandate is combating hunger, or in any form of hunger. So we have hidden hunger, which is like nutrient deficiencies and malnutrition, and also just not being able to get food. So the basic hunger as well. And in order to make sure that we're doing our job in that mandate, we link up with other NGOs, yes, local and international, and we also link up with our UN sister agencies. So in terms of your question on reproductive systems and health, we work very closely with UNFPA in all the countries where we both exist. And I've seen in Syria and I know in Sudan as well, the two organizations work hand in hand so that we are providing a comprehensive service to a family. So the family kind of gets the food, gets the medical care for the pregnant mother. Now, in terms of contraceptives, WFP is not involved in that, but we are involved in this concept of family planning indirectly through our school meals program. The school meals program carries within it this premise of gender equality and ensuring that any barriers to education on women or girls is removed, so that girls are sent to school and they're kept in class to learn, to graduate. And rather than being, married off and having a family, they can make more aware decisions, and they can determine their own future. And like I said, I've seen people in South Sudan and even people in Syria very much aware of that concept of education. So that's how we're supporting that issue.
Laurie Schultz has a follow-up question. Is there a vaccination program that works in conjunction with the food distribution?
Yes, I mean UNICEF is, they master this, the vaccination, and in Syria I have seen it on the ground. There was an area that was pretty much like I called it purgatory in one of the communications with the media. It's called Rukban, and it was it's in southern Syria, so just bordering Jordan. And there was about 45,000 plus people stuck there. And we had to drive for almost a full day to get to those people. We weren't just carrying food. UNICEF came along and they actually had the vaccination equipment, and they had the portable medical containers where all children were vaccinated, and this was ahead of a resolution that we knew was coming to allow these people to gradually get out of this limbo that they were in. So that's how we work hand in hand with them. So literally it was us knowing and them knowing that, in this location, there's about 2,000 children. So we move in with our food assistance, and they move in with the vaccination, and we take our turns to deliver. So we're definitely, sister agencies in that regard.
It seems like I've missed a question by Henning Mundell. So my apologies for that, Henning. While many countries, regions are short of food and money, does the WFP sell food to those who can't? Does the WFP sell food to those who can afford it?
No, no, we're not really in the business of selling anything. Like we're providing, we're a nonprofit organization, so we call out to donors and donors from governments, and now we're hoping that individual givers as well tune in. We send out calls to action and requirements for help. The assistance is given for free, all of it. But of course, there are, there is a structure to it. So, if a family is deemed after a certain period of time sufficiently food secure, then the aid is shifted to other areas of need where people are very vulnerable. But yeah, definitely no sale of food.
Our next question comes from Laura Schultz. In the area that use the food voucher system, can you comment on the short and long-term impact on the economy?
Right. So I've seen the positive impact. I've seen it really as positive, unless I'm too optimistic. The positive impact, I've seen it very much in Iraq and in Syria. The voucher system helps the already existing, it helps to strengthen safety nets in a given country. And in Syria, our voucher system is given to families who are in an area where there is a functioning market. So they're able to actually go and exchange their voucher for food and produce. We have several types of vouchers. One type of voucher is directly focused on women who are nursing and women who are pregnant. And these women have to be in areas where we have shops that we contract, so that they carry the products that we want to give. Of course, this is based on knowledge from our nutritionists of what the kcals required are. And in the end, the positive impact is you end up enlivening the local economy, and you end up pumping in this money that is directed and targeted at eating healthy and not something else. So definitely positive impact. Same with Iraq, in areas where that were not decimated and there were still markets around. We still moved in with the voucher system.
Our next question comes from Carol Kimoyo. At the local level, does the WFP hire/pay local helpers, or do they rely on unpaid volunteer help?
No, we rely on national staff and international staff, because having those two perspectives is very key. So of course they're volunteers, but I mean the overall the bulk of our hiring, or the bulk of the force on the ground in these areas they're all hired.
Okay. Our next question comes from Trevor Page. Concerning Yemen, the Houthis are often in the news accused of misusing WFP food. Tell us about the issues there.
So in areas of conflict where unfortunately there is an increase in proxy wars, and then that leads to stalemates and just a protracted conflict, which is Yemen at the moment, and Syria in just one part of Syria. What tends to happen is food can become a commodity that is used as a weapon of war, or used as a bargaining chip. So it's very, very unfortunate, but it happens, and it's part of human nature. And what had happened in the recent past in Yemen was a certain party, which Trevor, I mean, the Houthis, there was abuse of the aid or assistance. So, of course, the World Food Program is an organization that when it moves into a country, it has to work with the government or the de facto power on the ground. We don't operate on our own, because we're not parachuted from outer space. Like we move in, we have to have dealings with the ministries in order to roll out the safety net programs and to deliver the aid. So unfortunately, what had happened was there had been this consistent pattern of diversion of aid. So the assistance was not reaching the people who are intended to be reached for assistance, and it was being hoarded by this one party to the conflict. In sensitive cases like that, what we do is we begin to have very vigorous dialogues with the de facto, or the party of conflict, and this is in order to find a resolution, because we have to have the integrity as WFP to ensure that every dollar that a donor gives goes to the people who deserve it most. And we have this integrity. And a case in point was when we were forced, unfortunately, to suspend the distribution of aid, or not distribution, but the delivery of aid to that area, because this party to the conflict was refusing to allow its delivery to families, so the civilian population. And this kind of struggle then allowed the other side to fall back, and now we've resumed it. So it's really tough, because normally when you stop the assistance, you get a lot of bad press, because then people are like, oh, people are starving, WFP just cut the aid. But we really feel it's necessary at times, and they're very, very key times, because then if not, then you are not going to be able to deter a party to the conflict that's only focused on its own interests and not the interests of the people around it.
Trevor Page has a second question. Iraq seems to be a never-ending problem post-Sudan. From a humanitarian perspective, do you see a continuing need for food aid?
Yes, definitely there is a continuing need for food aid in those countries in the Middle East, and Iraq is definitely one of them. You're looking at a country that is struggling economically, and there is a lot of dissent. The systems in place there right now are sustaining people in terms of food security, and also the treatment of stunting. That was a key, I don't want to say feature, but problem of Iraq, especially in the southern governorates. And so the continuation of aid there is important, because we don't want to lose the gains that we've made in the past 4 to 5 years, or even longer, after the resurgence of ISIS there, and then the whatever resolution that was reached over there. So it's very important to continue the aid, and it's very important to continue the aid in other countries such as Yemen, and Syria, and Libya as well. It's never really, I don't want to make it sound like no amount is ever enough there's always going to be a continuation of need, because these conflicts, unfortunately, they take the people, they take their progress, they push it back by decades. So like by 20, 30 decades. And it's important to then make sure that as we're part of the world, to make sure that some of our resources are given to support these people.
Excellent. We have 4 more questions in the queue. And I noticed that we're right sort of on 11 o'clock. Are you okay to continue and answer those 4 more questions?
Yeah, sure. Do my best.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Our next question comes from Knut Peterson. Government subsidized food products imported from Western countries to survive the well-off people often make it difficult for local farmers to compete and sustain themselves. That was it. So I'll reread it. Okay. I'll reread it. Government subsidized food products imported from Western countries to survive, to service the well-off people, often make it difficult for local farmers to compete and sustain themselves. I guess that's more of a statement than a question, but maybe you'd like to comment on
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I mean, you know what I want. I mean, that's a good point. Thanks for raising that. What I want to say is that's why the World Food Program really prizes or values local production. If we're able to if we're able to support a people or a country to locally produce its own foods and its own means of feeding themselves, then we've created a know-how that cancel the need, and it's not it's not too expensive, and at the same time people get trained and people have a livelihood. This has been the case in Syria, going back to Syria, with the school meals. The school meals in Syria, I mean, the majority of them are made in Syria. They're no longer imported from Jordan or Egypt or elsewhere. And also the same thing with wheat. In Syria, we're looking to then be able to rely on local production for certain commodities. So yes, I agree with you that it's important, and we recognize that. That's why focusing on the local is a win-win for all.
Our next question comes from Buff Mendel. Do you work with failed states to help build infrastructure?
Do we work with, sorry?
Do you work with failed states to help build infrastructure? A failed state.
Okay. Yeah, okay, I see what you mean. Okay. So conflict, obviously leads to mass destruction of infrastructure and like even post-apocalyptic rubble. That's really what most of Syria is, and unfortunately, same for Yemen and also Iraq. So after you've given people food and assistance, naturally they move on to these other needs and concerns. Now, the World Food Program is solely focused on food assistance. That doesn't mean other needs don't exist, but we're really focused on the provision of food so that people are able to survive. The sort of like, I don't want to call it reconstruction, but like the rehabilitation of very important infrastructure such as schools is a necessity. I mean, we want children, we want the school feeding program to continue. Many are returning to their places of origin, but their school is no longer functioning. I believe there's like a photo of a girl in a pink sweater. She was looking at a damaged building. That's her school. And I told her, hey, do you go to school? She said, no, that's my school. And she's not really going to move away from this area. So it's a very important need. And, unfortunately, it's a question that's can become extremely political. All I can say is our focus has always been food. And maybe we're lucky as an organization because everybody agrees on food and the need for food to exist and be given. So.
Okay. We've got a question from Trevor Page. You've written about the hopelessness of displaced Syrians. How do you see the humanitarian situation for these unfortunate people 5 years from now?
So looking ahead, a country like Syria is it sort of passed through the phase of active conflict, except now for the Northwest. And this in itself is good because from a humanitarian perspective, you never want a conflict to continue. You always want a serious ceasefire to exist so that you can move in and save lives. That's really the lens that we have, that we look at the world through. In Syria, thankfully, active conflict has subsided in most of the country. And now it's this concept of rehabilitation and also supporting people to rebuild their lives. Look, the potential is there. The World Food Program continues to be there and other agencies as well. It's just a matter of navigating and making sure that we as a humanitarian community say it like it is. If there is need that goes beyond, that must go beyond basic needs, such as food and shelter, it has to be voiced. And thankfully, we have an important conference coming up in Brussels at the end of this month. And this is a pledging conference. So we're trying to get, as humanitarians, not just WFP, we're trying to get Syria back on the map and say, look, yes, you no longer read those, alerts and headlines that, their areas or the whole country is on fire, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And just to add, like in terms of Yemen, really what we need is a stop to the conflict. So that once the conflict stops, then that opens up the door of opportunity of saving lives, and then sustainable development comes after that.
Okay, and that was it for today's, for all the questions. We've got a couple of people. Laurie Schultz, thank you for your presentation and the work you do.
You're welcome.
Bev
Thank you.
Mandel as well, thank you for speaking to us. You are doing important work. And then I want to thank you on behalf of SACPA for spending an hour with us here. Do you have any final parting words for us before I end the live stream?
First off, thank you so much for having me. This is a great exercise because it's really important, for everyone in WFP and the aid agencies, but it's important for me because I was formerly a journalist, and I often at some point questioned, why am I just writing about bad news? And when I was lucky enough to join WFP and became a humanitarian, that sort of question really stopped, because I always feel like I have something good to share. And I mean, the good is there. Like I'm trying to tell people on behalf of the organization and along with colleagues and executive directors that, look, there is need, and we're all connected one way or another. And as someone I heard once say, it's important that we stretch our empathy muscle. So it's important to every once in a while just look outside of our immediate surroundings and see what's over there and help other people, because really great things can happen. And as a planet, or as many countries that we do have the resources to save lives and change lives.
Okay, thank you very much. And
you're welcome.
Yeah, I'm going to end the live stream, but before I do, I just want to send out a reminder that on Monday the 22nd, so this coming Monday at 10 a.m., we have our AGM, and I hope that you will all tune in for that. And thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot. Bye.